Welcome to the 8th webinar of Print Month 2025, presented by IFPDA and the IFPDA Foundation. I'm Anders Bergstrom, Director of the Editions Program at Hauser & Wirth and a member of the IFPDA Board. The IFPDA Foundation is the only U.S. nonprofit dedicated exclusively to supporting print-focused museum exhibitions, programs, and internships, and is the presenter of the IFPDA Book Award. The foundation is funded by ticket sales from IFPDA Print Fair, which will be held again in April 9th to the 12th at the Park Avenue Armory in New York. During Print Month, IFPDA invites our friends from across the scholarly and printmaking communities to share research and insights. We are very grateful to our friends at the Print Council of America for organizing today's program, From the WPA to Brand X Editions, the long history of screen printing at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which will be introduced by Print Council President Deborah Wood. Deborah will continue with introductions in a moment. Deborah is the curator of and writer from Chicago. She has served in the role of senior curator at the Block Museum of Art, Northwestern University, and has held positions at Art Institute of Chicago and the Baltimore Museum of Art. Her specialty in modern and contemporary works on paper was founded at the nexus of studio practice and art history, with a BFA from Cornell University and an MFA in printmaking from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. There will be a Q&A afterward, so have questions in mind. It will be moderated by Deb. And with that, I hand the program over to you, Deb.
Thank you, Anders, and thank you to Jenny Gibbs and to all of our excellent colleagues at the IFPDA and IFPDA Foundation. We are truly grateful that you've included Print Council in your programming. The Print Council of America was founded in 1956 with a mission to foster the creation, dissemination, and appreciation of fine prints, new and old. We are a nonprofit professional organization with an elected membership reflecting the fields of print curatorship, scholarship, and museum practice, and embracing the specialties of drawing, photography, and conservation. We continue our mission by sharing our knowledge and expertise through our publications, our website, our annual meetings, and programs such as this one. This is the fourth and final program that Print Council has put together for Print Month. All of our programming this year has, in one way or another, highlighted the long history of printmaking in America, a theme that seems appropriate since we are approaching America's 250th anniversary. I'd also like to take a quick moment, too, to thank our Print Council's Vice President, Freda Spira, who helped organize these programs. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce Louis Marchesano, Emily Friedman, and Laurel Garber. Louis is the Marion Boulton Kippy Stroud Deputy Director of Curatorial Affairs and Conservation at Philadelphia Art Museum. Prior to coming to Philadelphia, Louis served as the curator of prints and drawings at the Getty Research Institute in Los Angeles. His publications include A Kingdom of Images, French Prints in the Age of Louis XIV, produced in collaboration with the Bibliothèque Nationale de France and recognized by the French Ministry of Culture, which named him Chevalier in the Order of Arts and Letters. In 2021, his Katakovitz Prints Process Politics earned him the Alfred H. Barr Jr. Award for Excellence in Museum Scholarship. Most recently, he co-authored Brand X Editions, Innovation in Screen Printing with Laurel Garber and Emily Friedman. Emily Friedman is the inaugural Allen and Kelly Questrom Assistant Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Dallas Museum of Art. Prior to joining the DMA in 2024, Emily held positions at several institutions, including the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Musée des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, the Vanderbilt University Museum of Art, and Philadelphia Art Museum. She holds a PhD and MA in art history from Johns Hopkins University. Laurel Garber is the Park Family Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings at the Philadelphia Art Museum. Her recent projects for Philadelphia include Wanda Gog, Art for Life's Sake, Mary Cassatt at Work, and Emma Amos' Color Odyssey. Laurel received her PhD from Northwestern University. Now, please welcome our first speaker, Louis Marchesano.
Thanks, Deb. Anders, thank you, and thanks to IFPDA and for Print Council for organizing this event and for inviting us to speak about screen prints at the Philadelphia Museum. And we're really delighted to be here. What you see on the right there is a diagram from one of the first manuals dedicated to screen printing, a manual made by Anthony Vilonis in 1939, I believe it was, to teach artists how to make prints, how to make screen prints. And we'll hear more about that a little bit later. We're actually going to work on this. We're going to present 10 minutes each. And I'm going to actually start with Brand X editions and the gift from Brand X editions that we received, followed by Emily, who will talk about the archive that Carl Zigrosser, the first curator of prints, and Richard Dick Field established here at the museum. We have an extraordinary archive on the history of screen printing. And then at the end, Laurel Garber will cover some of the work that she and Christina Taylor, one of our paper conservators, did on some of the screen prints, a selection of screen prints produced at Brand X that really did some groundbreaking research. So let's start. Let's go to the next slide, please. We were invited to speak today. I think the catalyst was the Brand X Editions exhibition with the subtitle Innovation in Screen Printing. The exhibition and the catalog celebrate a major gift that Brand X gave to us a couple of years ago. And we've been adding to it since we first received the gift. The gift is it's a gift of 350. The initial gift was 350 screen prints, ranging in date from the early 1980s until the moment, more or less the moment that we received the first tranche of objects in 2023. The gift also includes one new impression of everything that Brand X publishes over the next number of years. And so I think now we're at about 450 or so prints. It's really extraordinary. What you see here is an amazing print with 293 colors, which is kind of mind-boggling for a screen print, by Rishi Johnson, that it took Brand X about 4 years to produce. Let me tell you a little bit about the Brand X folk. We can go to the next slide, please. Here's Bob Blanton at the front, looking very cool. This is like early 80s. I think it's early 80s, just shortly after Bob Blanton and one of his then business partners, Steve Weigeneck, opened up Brand X, which they opened up in 1979 in New York. They're now located in Long Island City, but they started off in New York. Bob Blanton went to New York in 1972. Went to New York in 1972 to, he went to Pratt, and he needed to make a living, ended up at Styria, and at the screen printing station at Styria. And he had been doing some artistic screen printing, some commercial screen printing before he moved to New York, and just basically developed a real knack and expertise there. Having walked in the door, the first things that he saw were Warhol's Mao and Rouché's insects that were being printed. So he entered the screen printing world in New York just at a moment when things were starting to change, when pop art was no longer, or was beginning to lose some of its dominance and some of its appeal. So it's a moment in which artists began to rethink what they could do with screen printing. So also, of course, important during this period is Jasper Johns and the innovations that he worked on with the Japanese master printers with his two flags shortly after Bob started working here. That was a different publishing or a different printing enterprise altogether. But it's just that moment that Bob enters a field. There's just this kind of thinking that, the possibilities with screen printing are quite vast. And it's that spirit of innovation that Bob really picked up when he walked into Styria, like this unimaginable that a 22-year-old would just get there and all of a sudden he's in charge. All of a sudden, after a year, he's in charge of the screen printing station. And it's that spirit of innovation that Bob has carried with him. So that he was there for about 5 or 6 years, and then set up his own shop in studio in 1979. The gift that we're receiving from Bob includes also, this promise, and that they've been continuing to provide us with new productions, including the print that you just saw, the Rashid Johnson that you just saw in the initial slide. Next slide, please. I just thought, I just like to share this story because I feel like I discovered something, having just worked on Katie Kolovitz. I wanted to turn my attention to something else, and I went to visit them during the pandemic. And I think you can tell that it was during the pandemic. I think it was in 2021 that I went. And I went to look at a couple of things, and they had pulled out all the stops. They pulled out so many prints that they laid out, including this handling copy of an earlier Rashid Johnson print that has, I forgot the number of colors, but something like 50 or 52. I don't remember it exactly. But the thing that impressed me and that wowed me and that really that confused me at first was like, how could this thing with the texture and a surface and depth, how could this be a screen print? So that began a long conversation. We ended up acquiring this print, purchasing this print for the collection. And also, next slide, please, looking at other prints that we wanted to bring in at some point. Here's this an amazing print by Adam Pendleton. And I think you can get a sense, even with my not very great photograph here, that there was this kind of this depth and richness and texture to the surface. And it was that really got the conversation started about technique and process, and how Bob had been working for the last 40 years to really develop all kinds of processes that weren't necessarily sort of natural to the screen printing technique. And this is an amazing print, which is in the current exhibition now. Let's go to the next slide. They showed me these progressive proofs of Chuck Close's self-portrait, which is just incredible. Again, we've dedicated a small gallery to these rather large prints. Next slide, please. And we also had a chance to look at a print that they worked on with Via Selmans. And so the gift that we got, so all of this material, in fact, has come to the PMA, which includes all of the material that they used to produce the Via Selmans seascape, including the positives, the negatives, progressive proofs, individually printed colors. It's just an extraordinary moment. It was an extraordinary moment for me to see how they were able to work with Via Selmans and construct what is basically a series of subtly differentiated grays and cobble them together into this extraordinary image. Next slide. And then there were subsequent visits by PMA staff as we started to, well, at some point in the conversation, Brand X, we talked to Brand X about the archive that we have here that Carl Zigrosser and Dick Field put together. We spoke about our sort of commitment to the field in general, to printmaking and teaching about printmaking and the history of printmaking, and continuing to add to the archive. Well, Brand X offered us their archive. It's a selection of prints. It's not every single thing that they've ever made, but it's a really wide, broad, deep selection. And so the staff, next slide, please, we went back a number of times to look at what they were producing, but also for our staff to get a sense of the scale of the work that we were being offered as this sort of major gift. So the gift includes, next slide. Oh yeah, so space is always an issue with these monumental prints, but here we are, we're examining the group of progressive proofs of the Chuck Close. So the gift with the gift was a promise from our side to produce a catalog, an exhibition, and then three one-person exhibitions in 2020 at the end of 26, 27, and 28. And we're starting those series with Adam Pendleton, and followed by Joel Messler and Rashid Johnson. Next slide, please. And here we are installing this amazing pair of prints by Robert Indiana called the Hartley Elegies, obviously riffing off of Mars and Hartley. And these are extraordinary. They're huge. These are 2 of a set of 15, and these are the smaller ones. And they are a kind of object lesson in more, let's say, traditional forms of screen printing, flat colors, solid lines. But the way in which the prints were registered, I hope that you all can come and see, is quite remarkable. And I won't get into the details of it now, but the kind of work that Bob has been undertaking since 1979, I think, is well represented in the exhibition. Next slide, please. Yeah, we're here. So this is the beginning here. So we see the 2 prints by Adam Pendleton, and in the following gallery, the series of progressive proofs by of Chuck Close's work. And the great thing about working with Bob this closely is that we got all the backstories to the production of many of these prints and the way that Chuck Close worked. He was an inveterate printmaker, but seems to have really taken to screen printing in a way that that could have reflected the way that he himself worked in his own painting practice. Next slide. The largest print that we have in the largest single sheet print that we have in the collection is a print by Marion from the early 1990s, which was part of a series that she did on Native Americans. It was a series that was commissioned by an arts organization in Spain. And then the next slide. Here we see this is the hallway outside of the exhibition. This is a portfolio that Brand X produced. I'm going to wrap up in just a minute and hand it over to Emily. I'm just mindful of the time. They produced about 6 years ago. Each of these artists, starting with Troy Mitch on the left, Deb Cass, James Sienna, Micheline Thomas, Joel Messler, Adam Pendleton, and Robert Kushner, donated their time, and the sale of the portfolios goes towards print education. And the next slide. Oh, I wish that we had the room to show the entire archive dedicated to the production of the Salmon's print, which the final state is at the bottom right. It's rather extraordinary opportunity, but I think you get a sense when you're in the exhibition of how special the work is that Brand X does. The chromist, the person who separates the colors so that the screens, each individual screen can be produced, basically went through and extracted 16 subtly different variations of gray in order to produce this final image. And so we have all of the back material that helps us document that and show that. So I think in the future, there's a possibility here that we could do a small boutique exhibitions dedicated solely to the production of these prints. And then the next one in the same gallery at the other end, we have an example of different examples of different kinds of screen printing effects. I'm not going to go through the details here, obviously, but starting on the right with Joel Messler, more traditional in many ways with the, again, bold colors, hard edges, the painterly version of the Helen Frankenthaler, and then a print that I believe Laurel will talk about where there's a gentleman with the blue shirt standing in front of it by Emily May Peters, which is kind of a masterpiece in sort of tonal printmaking. It's rather extraordinary. And of course, Jennifer Bartlett on the left. What you see in the center, and this is the transition to Emily, who's going to talk about the archive. are some stencils, and you will see the actual final image, which is at the other end of this case in just a second. These are stencils and a print that were produced by Anthony Valonis, who set up the screen printing workshop in the WPA in 1939 with the express mission to teach artists how to make screen prints, how to make their own screen printing apparatus, and how to mix their own colors. Next slide, please. Anthony Valonis was connected to Carl Zigrosser, our first curator of prints here, who collected Valonis's own archive and brought it into the museum here. Zigrosser was also the one to come up with the term serigraph in order to distinguish artistic printmaking, screen prints, from the commercial variety that had been around since the beginning of the 20th century. The archive, thanks to Carl, we have this extraordinary archive, and thanks to Dick Field, who worked on the exhibition in 1971 on the history of a medium, silkscreen, a history of a medium, that archive was enriched in extraordinary ways. And we're still discovering stuff based upon the work that Dick had done. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Friedman.
Thank you, Louis. If we could actually go back one slide. Great, let's start here. So in 1971, as Louis says, Richard S. Dick Field was the assistant curator of prints at the Philadelphia Art Museum, and he organized this exhibition, Silkscreen: History of a Medium. And you have celebrated pop artist Eduardo Paolozzi producing an original work, which is on the cover of this accompanying publication. Slide, please. So the exhibition was fundamental for tracing the history and the development of the medium from its early commercial life, an example of which you see at the left of your screen, and then all the way to contemporary artists such as Paolozzi, but of course Andy Warhol, among many others, who had embraced screen printing in the 1960s. Next slide, please. So the archives of the Philadelphia Art Museum are filled with the ephemera of Field's research, and Zigrosser as well, but we'll get to him in a little bit, and exhibition preparation, which includes my favorite, this fantastic photograph of Creta Kent when she was still Sister Mary Creta Kent, teaching a screen printing class in full nun's habit. And also present in the archives are the numerous letters that Field traded with early screen print artists on their process, as well as several individuals who may not have necessarily considered themselves artists, but who were nonetheless instrumental in the development of the screen printing technique. Next slide. So this angle was what was particularly unique about the 1971 exhibition, because instead of distancing screen printing from its commercial origin, Field embraced that connection, reaching out to companies like the Velvetone Poster Company and Selectascene in an attempt to better understand the earliest manifestations of the medium in America. And in his introduction, Field wrote, "The more one studies its past history, that is, its commercial beginnings and subsequent development, the more one understands the factors that have made silkscreen such a meaningful medium for the present. Specifically, the processes, attitudes, images, and structural conventions of commercial printing forge common links between the art of the 1960s and strictly use-oriented industrial product." And so what this quote and then sort of the correspondence that we were able to access in Philly illustrates is that for Field, finding the earliest history of the American screen print was a surprisingly elusive task, because prior to the establishment of the so-called fine art screen print, screen printing was as much a history of corporate America and the marketing boom of the early 1900s as it was a history of artistic technology. The particularities of the screen print process were a crucial part of its growth because it could be printed onto nearly any substrate, so soda cans, fabric, glass, plastic, cardboard, and much more. Screen printing really touched almost everything: pennants, tire covers, labels, cans, decals, display cards, highway signs, posters, and then electronic circuitry, apparently. And the US military was an early adoptee of the process for Army flags, as was the Crayola Crayon Company, which I assume is for sort of labels wrapping around each crayon stick, or maybe the boxes, and soda can manufacturers. Slide, please. So Dick Field wrote to all of them, and they were often quite surprised and unprepared when they received his letters. Val Joachim of the American Crayon Company was particularly regretful when she informed Field that much of their past, as she referred to it, had actually been destroyed. Colonel Eugene Ganley, commanding officer of heraldry, was also unable to help. Slide, please. So Field had much better luck with selectacene, connecting with one of the inventors of the method, Roy Beck, who gifted this, which we believe to be the earliest color screen print, to the museum in 1972. Slide. So in addition to examples of the most early and the most recent screen printing, Field's exhibition also covered what he termed the first 15 years of non-commercial screen printing. So a period between 1935 and 1950 that, as Lewis mentioned, grew out of the Works Progress Administration's poster programs and featured artists such as Anthony Valonis, Guy McCoy, Reva Helfand, Elizabeth Old, Hyman Warsager, and Harry Sternberg, among many, many others. These artists were interested in making screen print imitate other mediums, particularly oil painting, drawing, and watercolor, and were huge proponents of technical experimentation and pedagogy. And I'll just point out that the image on the top right is the Valonis that you saw sort of broken apart in one of Lewis's last slides in the vitrine. Slide, please. So theirs was an ideology founded in research sharing and open collaboration. Most of the Silkscreen unit members were teachers, and many published how-to guides that emphasized the accessibility of screen print. And I know Laurel will discuss Valonis's publication, which is at the center here. And then at right, you can see an advertisement for Harry Sternberg's Guide to Screen Printing, which guides the reader through the entire process. That is all the way from making the printing frame to planning the drawing, registering it, gluing the screen, registering the printing paper, printing, and he even covers cleaning the equipment and then drying the prints. In his introduction, he outlines the following 3 principles. 1, that simple and large color areas should be used since small detail is difficult to manipulate. It is unwise to attempt any subject where minute detail is involved, warns Sternberg. The human figure, when used, must be dealt with in simple chiaroscuro. Landscape and still life lend themselves easily to silkscreen, and that really bears itself out in this sort of era of screen printing. It's really the focus is landscape and still lifes. 2, the fullest possible use should be made of each color. And 3, the utmost use should be made of the textural possibilities of silkscreen. Sternberg advises that by using the crayon and various textured materials, by dry brushing, by spatter and stop out, a rich range of textural change can be realized. Anthony Valonis and Hyman Warsager applied for a Guggenheim Fellowship in order to write a technical book that would, much like Sternberg's project, guide the reader through every step of the process. Their immediate and ultimate goal, they write, is to develop and practice as creative artists working particularly in serigraphy, and to make this medium available to the artist and the product of this medium to the public. And so this term serigraphy, as Lewis also teased, brings us to the other Philadelphia curator of print who was instrumental in establishing the institutional appreciation for screen printing. And this is, of course, Carl Zigrosser. With his 1971 exhibition, Field is very much building on Zigrosser's legacy. So the very first curator of prints at the museum, Zigrosser was an early champion of screen printing as fine art, and he was the one who coined the term serigraph in an attempt to distinguish these artists' work from the commercial uses of the medium. And because of his relationship with many of the WPA artists from his days as the director of the Via Gallery, Zigrosser was really instrumental in bringing these artists and this collection to Philadelphia, accessioning hundreds of early screen prints into the collection. And it really is because of Zigrosser and his work that Field was able to then build an exhibition with such depth in 1971. In 1941, Zigrosser published The Serigraph, a New Medium, in the Print Collector's Quarterly, which narrated the history of American screen printing from the Volanus-founded silkscreen unit under the graphic section of the New York City WPA to the Incorporated Silkscreen Group on New York's Lower East Side. He also references some of the first exhibitions on the topic, including one organized by an art historian named Elizabeth McCausland, who organized a show at the Springfield Museum. And she's someone who's somewhat overlooked or more likely referenced to in relation to her partner, Berenice Abbott. But she was also someone who was an incredibly important curator and instrumental in the sort of establishment of an interest in fine art screen printing at this moment, curating one of the very first shows on the topic. And interestingly enough, she vehemently disagreed with Zigrosser about the term serigraph, but that's for another story or time. So as a conclusion to his essay, Zigrosser writes, "Serigraphy is at its beginning. No one knows to what limits it will be carried. Prophecy is always hazardous. But it might well be that the serigraph will have, for the 20th century, the significance and potentiality that the lithograph had for the 19th century. With the active interest displayed in it by the artists and the momentum it has gathered in exhibitions and with the public, it seems hardly likely that serigraphy is a flash in the pan. It is an American contribution to the progress of the graphic arts." And with that, I will pass it over to Laurel.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So I am here to talk a little bit about the catalog that we produced for the Brand X exhibition. But in order to do so, I'm actually also, like Emily and Louis, going to return us to Carl Zigrosser and some of his own writing about the medium in 1941. So in his The Serigraph, a New Medium, which you're looking at here and you've heard a bit about already, Zigrosser writes, quote, "Since the words silkscreen stencil prints are cumbersome, the name serigraph is suggested for the color prints of the new technique. The word is a combination of two Greek roots meaning silk drawing. All hail to the serigraph, the new medium for bringing colorful art to the people." End quote. Zigrosser locates the virtues of artistic screen printing in its surprising flexibility, as he calls it. In general, he writes, the technique provides the artist with a free and mutable approach to color printing, end quote. For him in 1941, it was Anthony Volanus, above all others, who had unlocked the rich potential of the medium by finding its fluent and versatile qualities. He did this through experimentation with, quote, the new technique and by adapting it to artists' needs. And as Emily's mentioned, Volanus published a brochure in 1940 detailing the silkscreen process used by the poster division of the New York City WPA art project. The first of its kind for the medium, Volanus's handbook was intended, in his words, to be a guide to the widest possibilities inherent in the process, which can, at its peak application, harness the expression of the most sensitive artist. Volanus is clear that he wants to present all data needed to, quote, all those interested in the method. And crucially for Volanus, quote again, the development of new techniques are invaluable to artists and art students in solving technical problems. Volanus's description of experimentation and artistic innovation as answers to artistic problems became a helpful framework for the essay on technique in our catalog that I co-wrote with our paper conservator, Christina Taylor. And I'd say it also shaped much of the catalog in general. Our essay focused on the dynamics of the Brand X workshop, and we were particularly interested in the many roles essential to the production of their projects beyond that of the artist. We decided to feature 3 technical case studies that we felt represented varying approaches to solving technical problems in screen print, posed by the unique challenge of meeting an artist's expressive demands. So, for instance, we wrote about Emily May Smith's poetry, Toy in Blood, which you see here, a screen print translation of the artist's wry and engaging precisionist painting style. This we saw as a project specifically driven by the role of one of the workshop's chromists, Tamsin Doherty. In this case, Tamsin worked with digital drafting tools to create 47 layers that, when printed, cohered into the lush fullness of the final image. Since colors don't physically mix in the screen printing process, Tamsin had to devise a plan for sequentially printing translucent inks that, when layered, achieve an effect that replicates the smooth gradients that characterizes Smith's work. And I'm showing you here each of the layers or positives that were then used to block light during the screen exposure process to create the screens that would then be used to print. And each layer, of course, this is our own little rendering here of the positives and then the related colors. Each layer, of course, is ultimately screen printed in the appropriate color ink, determined by the printer with the chromist, to build up to the final image. And our essay walks through the process step by step, from Tamsin's digital color separation process to her delivery of positives to the printer Roberto Mercedes for the production of each screen, to the exposure process, to the mixing of inks, and to the printer's registration system. The eerie precision of poetry we show was produced through a careful dance among chromist, printer, and artist. And I'll share just one more example that we addressed in our essay. This was a major focus for us, Untitled Seascape by Rashid Johnson. And just as Emily May Smith's layers of translucent color posed a particular problem for the role of the chromist, Rashid Johnson's projects with Brand X pushed its printers to expand their techniques and modes of working to invoke the artist's expressive and textural images. And in the words of Johnson's collaborating printer, Jamie Miller, Brand X's work with Johnson started with an exploratory phase of, quote, looking for a way to make images akin to the artist's Anxious Men and Seascape series. In these, Johnson excavates form and image from layers of artistic matter. In the work that I'm showing you here, for instance, Johnson carves anonymous figures into a dense mixture of black soap and wax that he splatters on a white tile background. Working then in frenetic gestural marks, Johnson excises figures from the waxy black material. And this subtractive process became the premise for Johnson's Brand X projects. Here's another quote from the printer. "It took us about a year to get our thinking right," Jamie told Christina and me during our sessions, talking with them and visiting the workshop. "We were trying to figure out what to do." And the print at right here, Untitled Seascape, shows what they worked out. The simple repeated form of a crescent-shaped boat glows in light blue amid an expanse of rich textured darkness. Here, though, the boat forms were not carved away, but rather built up through a complex and multi-stage printing process. Working from 8 positives drawn by the chromist, each exposed to a screen, Miller then printed layers of white and blue inks characterized by a shiny slickness. So on the left, we have a proof that Brand X gave us to have in our archive because it really helps explicate their process. You see only the screen printed inks here. And then next, 2 printers, you see here, Jamie and Marion, applied a thick mixture of pigment and acrylic medium across the full expanse of paper, directly on top of the screen printed layers on the paper. They then used rags to selectively remove the pigmented mixture from the surface of the paper. And everywhere that the paper was bare, the dark mixture seeped into the paper, absorbed and sank into its porous fibers. And everywhere that was screen printed with this slick ink, the mixture was wiped away from the surface, exposing the printed image below. So the resulting image, sorry, I'll go back here, emerged through a wholly new choreography of process and materials, spurred by the possibilities and problems of Rashid Johnson's paintings and drawings. Searching out new solutions in screen printing and innovating within its material constraints, the collaborators at Brand X gave Johnson's images a new field of expressive action. And in many ways, I've come to see Brand X's screen prints bearing out Zigrosser's early predictions in 1941 that Emily was just referring to as well, about the medium's chameleonic flexibility. Brand X's prints testify to the remarkable capacity of the medium to meet an artist's demanding individual vision. Throughout the catalog, and in the essay I wrote with Christina in particular, we sought out to show that their prints are also really shining examples of the collaboration and experimentation that make this medium so vital and so notable across time. And I wanted to just mention a few of the other essays and content of the catalog. As Louis mentioned, his essay looks, or maybe he didn't mention this, but I'll mention this. Louis wrote an essay that really looks at the history of screen printing sort of just before and around Bob Blanton, the master printer and founder of Brand X, landed his first screen printing job at Styria Studio in New York in 1972. And Louis pays particular attention to the practitioners of screen print sort of just before or around Rauschenberg, Rouchet, and Warhol, exploring the historical contingency of what a screen print could be. And then an interview with Brand X master printer and founder Bob Blanton and his business partner David DeSantis gives texture and color to the evolution and story of the Brand X studio across nearly 5 decades. And then finally, I'm showing you here an inventory of all the works that Louis was talking about that are now part of the museum's collection. And this was really diligently cataloged by Emily and our wonderful curatorial fellow, Dobrovskaya. And here we've taken great care, as we do in the exhibition itself, to identify the chromist, the printer, the number of separations and colors, just to show the truly collaborative nature of the medium. And finally, another paper conservator here, Tom Primo, created this wonderful glossary of terminology and process-oriented terms that relate to screen printing in particular. And we decided to illustrate it, and in a way it's sort of referring back to some of the Valonis illustrations and the great way that text and image work together in those handbooks. So I think I'll stop there and stop sharing your screen, and we can maybe open up to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Louis. Thank you, Emily, and thank you, Laurel. That was just terrific. I see a couple of questions coming in, but first I want to begin with a question for the 3 of you. So I'm trying to just wrap my head around all of the works that Philadelphia has. About how many screen prints do you have in the collection, counting the Brand X editions? How is this rounding out your collection of works?
Debbie, that's such a great and obvious question. I don't think we've ever counted.
Okay, well, there you go. So,
but many hundreds. But maybe,
okay.
Laurel, do you know?
No, actually, we sent Emily, or Em sent you some great reports from TMS of just the prints acquired during Field's tenure here, right? And Zigrosser's.
And Valonis. So both of them, and like each one was hundreds. So who knows?
Yeah, hundreds.
Many hundreds. Deb,
Many
that's
hundreds.
your answer.
Yeah.
many hundreds.
That's truly amazing. And it's so interesting and really wonderful that you've brought our colleague Dick Field and Carl Zigrosser into the history, and especially Dick's perspective of going to commercial printing first to look at the founding of the medium, because of course that's this great parallel to his key interests at the time, which were in pop art and artists who were returning to that kind of cool, distant approach to making art. So one of my questions for you is, as you're looking through all of these hundreds of works throughout the history of screen printing, do you see a different treatment in surface? Does it ebb and flow with the objectives of the artists?
Gosh, that is a really good question. It's just to go back to Dick for a second in his 1971-72 exhibition. He wanted to really explore. His question was, why is screen printing in the 1960s all of a sudden like interesting to
Right.
artists? And it was, of course, the kind of anonymous lack of the hand of the artist approach that appealed to many of the artists in the 1960s. But the irony here, and Dick himself says this at some point, is that when he was working on the exhibition, by the time the exhibition started, many artists had started to move away from that. And then when Dick did his work on his first publication on Jasper Johns' prints, he dives into that topic a little more because Jasper Johns was really instrumental in moving away. He had no interest in having a kind of anonymous surface. He really wanted that to capture the painterly effects of his own work. And so Dick was so instrumental in that. And the thing about the pamphlet, there wasn't a publication. The pamphlet that accompanied the exhibition is extraordinary because it is still the kind of foundational work that everyone, including me and Laurel, but everyone goes to. It's so concise and brilliant in its analysis and sort of perspicacious and the way the entire framing of the question. And so Dick's interest in the archival material, most of which didn't make it into his exhibition. What he found was extraordinary, and we owe, like the print field, owes him a lot for many things, but this is definitely one of them. I think that different artists in different periods had very different needs, right? So at the beginning, the idea of an anonymous surface, let's say, a surface without the artist's imprint, that was anathema to what the artists around Carl Zigrosser were doing. They insisted that the artists themselves produce the screens, and often they use a touch and glue method, which is a method, basically they did it themselves with the blocking screens to make stencils. And so for them, that was a paramount importance to distinguish themselves and their work from their commercial counterparts. 1960s, the things change, and all of a sudden it's okay to hand it off to a commercial printer, and then eventually it becomes a master printer. There are master printers who take on this role. Bob is one of them. He's not the first, but Bob is one of the earlier ones. Screen printing master printer, in the same way that you would have master printers who deal with etching and working collaboratively with artists, and of course with lithography, working collaboratively with artists. So things change quite significantly. And then with Bob, in that tradition of working he and his studio working collaboratively with artists, their job is to translate the effects or the work of an artist from one medium to another, and then in the process they create another work together. And for Bob, Bob never shied away from artists who asked seemingly impossible things. Some of the prints in the exhibition, one set by William Bailey, who was an amazing painter, extraordinarily subtle tonality. The kind of tonal variations and shifts in those prints were extraordinarily challenging for Bob. But once they were able to conquer those challenges, Bob said it was a turning point. There are many turning points like that. So I'm hoping that those of you who haven't had a chance to see the exhibition can make it down before the 17th of November to look at some of this work.
Great. Well, I want to get to some of the questions. There are several flowing into our feed here. The first comes from Shelley Langdale, who
From
and
Shelley worked on an exhibition, I think, in the early 2000s.
Yes, when she was at the
when she was here,
Philadelphia, right, and now of course at the NGA.
Yeah.
So Shelley asks, one key aspect of screen printing that I don't believe has been mentioned that was crucial to Anthony Vilonis's introduction to the screen printing technique to the WPA poster workshop, and then to his argument for setting up a separate screen printing unit is the fact that unlike other printmaking techniques, the image is not reversed. So the many artists who have not made prints before and who came to the WPA during the Depression found this approach much easier to conceptualize their compositions, making the new artistic application of screen print very attractive for many artists. So in a way, it's this, every person's process that
Yeah,
opens
I
the
think
field
that
up.
absolutely. I think that that's a great point. I think when Emily said that Anthony Vilonis was working to democratize printmaking, I think that's what she meant, right? The whole everything from that point, that excellent point that Shelley brings up, to basically learning how to produce your own frame and
Right.
your own screen and clean your own equipment. It was the whole package, because the WPA, as you know, the earlier workshops, they were primarily lithography workshops, and there you had to conceptualize the reversal, but also you had to work on a stone, and you had to work with a master printer. There was no way around that. Almost all of them, like 99% of artists, worked with master printers that were in the WPA, dealing with lithography. And with this, basically, you got a few lessons and you can go off on your own. And you didn't have to think about reversing. You didn't have to think too much about the kinds of issues that you had to deal with, like, lifting or having delivered a heavy lithographic stone to your
Right.
house or to your studio and then back to the print shop.
So we have a couple of very basic questions coming in. Maybe someone can put the answers in the chat. One of the attendees would like to know how to order the catalog that you showed pictures of from the Brand X editions exhibition. And the other person is very interested in accessing the Colwitz catalog.
Deb, whoever it is, could you just give them my info, and I'm happy to send them the
Okay.
information. The Cole
Okay.
catalog, you got to go online and hope for the best.
Okay, all right.
It's out
Yeah,
of
that's what I
print.
was afraid of. This
Yeah.
it's an anonymous attendee, so I'm not sure who's
Maybe we
asking.
can. So if you go to our website,
Okay,
you can find it there. I think it's also on Amazon. So it's Brand X Editions.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. And I think yes, here we go. Thank
Oh,
you. Thank you, Laurel. Perfect.
Laurel has it. Thank you.
I don't know if that went to
And
the full chat, so maybe if Jenny could
yeah.
there.
And then another question is, if it's not too far afield, do you think that the WPA painter and printmaker Max Arthur Cohen's screen printing instructions of Andy Warhol in 1964, at Andy Warhol's request, was an important catalyst in propelling Warhol's rise to fame in the art world, which accelerated around that time? Good
So
question.
one of the, that's a great question. And so Cohen is credited with showing or at least introducing screen printing to Warhol. But I think in the most recent, was it Adam Gopnik who wrote the giant Warhol biography? I think he mentions the fact that some of the screen printing, the Serigraph Society demonstrations that were that basically they traveled, throughout the country to universities and to high schools. I think Warhol may have. I think Adam Gopnik surmises that Warhol may have run into screen printing at one of those demonstrations.
Right.
Not mistaken. But Cohen's an important figure for many, introducing screen printing to many artists, going back to the 1940s, if I'm not mistaken.
Shelley returns to say that there's also an important publication by Giulio Liguiler, a publication that addresses European as well as American origins of screen printing, is also a useful complement to the Philadelphia Museum's archives and
Yeah,
resources.
that's an amazing catalog because it covers everything.
Yeah.
Like, it covers everything, and it includes many images from our collection, but it's an incredible resource, absolutely, which we used, absolutely.
And I'll also add that in the archives, you can find correspondence between Guido Langweiler and some of the curators. So
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Harriet Steinett asks one historical question. That is, were the WPA posters produced using cut stencils, touche and glue only, or were there any photographic techniques used at the time?
I've never looked into that, to be honest with you. All I can tell you about the poster division, this is all I know about is that Anthony Valonis was hired at some point, and he walked in apparently, and he said, "Why are you guys making posters with? Why are you guys painting individual posters? Why don't you use screen prints?" And then the conversation started about artistic screen printing. I really don't know. I haven't looked into that topic. The book that Shelley just mentioned might actually have something on that.
It might. Yes, and I see Anders has joined us again, so we may have to wrap this up. Apologies to everyone if we didn't get to all of your questions. We'll certainly forward these to our speakers to get back to you. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Great. Hey, thanks everyone for today's great presentations and the conversation that followed. Our final webinar of Print Month is on Wednesday, October 29th at noon. And this one will be presented by the Department of Drawings and Prints from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Printmaking, Mobility, and Artistic Networks from the 15th century to the 20th. And with that, I think that wraps it up for today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.